about 30% of the not 30, 15 to 20%. Damn, my phone just gave me a warning or something. I think it just, yeah, when I upload this, it's going to have to be in multiple parts because it splits it, so it just split it. Anyway, 1,200 inmates. I think the black population was, he said, was 15 to 20%, so that's basically what? About anywhere between 300 and 400 inmates were black. You know, it's a little bit more easygoing. The crimes that a lot of those people were in there for was not as vile, I guess. And, you know, a lot of the inmates there would indulge in more intellectual activities, things that take thought. Like, you know, they had debates and all kind of stuff. But then as far as like the instructors that came up there to teach, you know, he said they will always be from Harvard, Boston University, like the surrounding schools, top-notch shit, basically. And then the library that they had was donated to them by a rich guy. His name was Park something. It was a rich guy, but he had like a large section on religion, I think. No, history. Religion and history, or was it history? I think it was history. He had a large section on history. And they had a little bit more leeway there, so you know, sometimes Malcolm would go into the library and pick books that he would like to read, and then he started reading. As far as like the library section, I forget to mention they had so many books that like they had crates. You know, he was saying like in the back of the library, because they didn't have enough room on the shelves because they were so overly stocked with books, they had crates with books in it too. So they had a really good selection and whatnot. Now, as far as during this whole time period, this is when his brother Filbert wrote to him. Now, at this point in the book, before I go on, they had pretty much converted at least 4 of his siblings. Because like I say, Yvonne and them, they don't mention them no more, as far as what I can recall. But Wilford, Filbert, Hilder, and Reginald, they all had converted to Islam by this point. So Filbert wrote Malcolm X a letter, and that's when he introduced him to what the Nation of Islam was. Don't know how deep he went into as far as their teachings, but you know, he pointed out that the Nation of Islam was the true religion for the black man and this and that or whatnot. And Malcolm did respond to the letter, but it was more so like, you know, his usual response when it comes to religion. Because even though what Filbert hinted or highlighted to him was more so exotic in comparison, Malcolm still kind of hit that shit with one little stroke brash. He wasn't trying to hear it. So, in the book, at this point, while Malcolm is mentioning that his brother Reginald decided to write him a follow-up letter, he pointed out that his siblings behind the scenes felt like, you know, that they would use Reginald as a conduit, basically, because Malcolm was older than Reginald, but he was closer to him, especially in the street sense. You know what I'm saying? So Malcolm perceived it like, you know, of course, you know, looking at it, reflecting, but as far as in the book, he was saying that was like the scheme going on behind the scenes between his siblings. So they all decided to use Reginald to try to kind of, you know, open Malcolm up a little bit more so they could eventually get him to pay attention to what they're saying and then convert to this religion. Because a lot of these people, man, especially back in the day, and then based on my experiences and me, you know, it's not for, I feel like for a lot of people that do follow that, it's not really necessarily a blanket. You know what I'm saying? It's not like a, just from what I could tell, it's not like a set of thoughts and you just put that shit on like a jacket. You know, some of them really believe that. You get what I'm saying? Like, you know how they say hip-hop is a lifestyle? Again, I'm just speaking on my experiences too, not just what I know about and what I researched, but what I have experienced years ago. It's kind of like hip-hop is a lifestyle, meaning like you can't get away from it. whether you rap or not. You know what I'm saying? You could turn your music off. You could walk outside your booth. You could do whatever. 9 times out of 10, you still surrounded by the shit because it's a lifestyle. It's so much of a culture. You're going to see it expressed maybe in people's clothing, depending on where you are, maybe in graffiti, you know what I'm saying? Or just in language and certain words that's used, just the whole persona. It's like you can't get away from it. It's going to be in your face in some type of way, shape, or form. So as far as like that analogy, my experiences and what I witnessed with certain people and what I seen with people that I don't know at all, but I just pay attention to them. It's not just a set of thoughts. It's a lifestyle. Some people that be trying to convert people into the Nation of Islam, they really are trying to convert. Like, they really feel like this is going to benefit you. You know what I'm saying? Like, okay, I'm gonna keep this in chronological order, so I'm trying not to skip too much, but like later on when Malcolm talks about like that spiritual that spiritual essence of a movement, particularly with the Nation of Islam, that he felt like, you know, was compromised in a sense, which really hurt him, and how he had in consideration or in mind thousands of poor people that would be affected. I'm talking about like when he gets to the point where, you know, Muhammad admits to impregnating certain women or whatnot. You know, like that thing, I'm gonna call it the thing. That thing that he's talking about, I understand exactly what he's like, not just logically, like I understand what he means by that. That's what I'm saying. Like some of these people that be so, you gotta experience it. You know what I'm saying? You could read it. You could read it. Like it's not just. And I've never been a member, so I'm not being biased. I'm just saying in a certain way. It's like, it's not an ego. It's not just an egotistical thing. You know what I'm saying? So as far as like his siblings and them, like in other words, all of them deciding to use Reginald was not condescension or condescending at all. You know what I'm saying? But it did help. So Reginald wrote him a letter or whatnot after Filbert, and you know, he basically he threw it in the framework of a hint, and this is how I also know that like they knew exactly what they were doing, and what Malcolm X assessed about this later on was on point. He threw it in like a hint almost. You know, he understood the mentality of Malcolm, so he was like, when he wrote him a letter, he was like, I know a guaranteed way. I know a way to get you out of prison. But it also involves, but you also have to stop smoking cigarettes, and you got to stop eating pork. Now, you know what I'm saying? Us looking at this shit in our time period, whether 16 years ago or today or whatnot, you know, it comes off as generic, you know. But if you understand, you agree with what I just said, you'll see why it worked on Malcolm. You know what I'm saying? The way that the guy formulated that, you'll see why it worked. They hinted. Because Malcolm was saying, like, you know, he was kind of, you know, those words stuck with him, and he was always curious to what exactly did Reginald mean. And, you know, from the framework that Malcolm operated in within so many years, you know, as far as the street framework, when he transitioned into being a hustler and incorporated many of those elements and aspects and facets into his personality and his being, he was still in part operating on that. So he felt like it could be like a con scheme that Reginald had, you know what I'm saying, that he didn't want to fully unveil. And he thought about it to that degree to where, you know, in the book he said, like, even after the letter, he still thought about it. Like, what was he talking about? What was this plan? Like, he'll anticipate what it may or may not be. And then he thought about, like, confiding in Bimby. I thought that was interesting, too, because at this point, remember, he's, like, in a whole different, you know, he's been transferred. So I didn't know, like, if Bimby ended up getting transferred with him, or he was just, like, writing letters to Bimby or whatnot. But anyway, he thought about, like, confiding in Bimby and other people trying to figure out, but he just decided to, you know, keep it to himself. So, second time around, oh yeah, and he did take it serious to an extent. He did. He did just think about it. He stopped eating pork, but he stopped smoking at first. When he read that letter, he had like a pack of cigarettes. I believe he said he opened the cigarettes and he just finished it. And after that, he never smoked again. All the way on to his fucking death, he never smoked a cigarette after that. As far as the pork, they was serving that in the lunchroom, but he wasn't really too much concerned about that. He was still trying to figure out what was his brother hinting at, but eventually he stopped eating pork too. Second time around, Reginald visited him. Alright? So, during this visit, Malcolm was kind of like at the edge of his seat. Based on what he said in the book, he was like so curious as to what he was gonna say. You know what I mean? Like he was paying attention to him. And when Reginald started talking, that's when he, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but basically he was, he said the white man is the devil. That's what he said. As he's communicating these teachings to Malcolm, I think that was like the attention grabber. But that was definitely something that he said to Malcolm that caused him to think right there in a moment. He said the white man is the devil. And Malcolm said instantly he reflected on all of his experiences dealing with white people from the moment when he was a child, the harassments that his parents suffered, the child services, his teacher in school, people on the streets, old girl Sophia. He said every white person he ever came across, it was something about that statement that his brother made that made sense. Then his brother went to flesh it out even more and started talking about like how the white man is a devil and that there's a guy who knows, Elijah Muhammad, who knows all things. He is God. Oh, actually, that he is God or whatnot. He has 360 degrees of knowledge. See, this is the thing. See, my understanding, I want to make sure I don't misquote the book. Because Master Farad Muhammad, according to the Nation of Islam teachings, was actually God in human form. Elijah Muhammad was largely referred to as the messenger of God. But I do believe at this point they did say I do believe they did refer to Elijah Muhammad as God. But anyway, they were saying God knows everything, 360. The devil only has 33 degrees of knowledge, and it is known as masonry, and he has utilized it to control the world. And he started talking about the natures of people, the natures, basically just making the white people period synonymous with the devil. And then he pointed to some of the white inmates, and he just started going into the teachers or whatever. And Malcolm was so captivated by it that he was listening. So when the visit was over, after the fact, Malcolm was still thinking about it. It was something that had him almost borderline state of shock. A moment of clarity from his point of view, a moment of clarity times 30. Because he said some of the guards and then some of the doctors or whatnot, they thought something was wrong with him because he'll just be sitting there with a blank look on his face and he wouldn't be really too responsive to anything. All this shit was circulating in his head. You know what I'm saying? So eventually, he wrote Elijah Muhammad a letter. But also, I believe his brother Reginald visited him again. So basically, he pretty much converted. He started reading books more. And aside from him writing these letters, he got a little frustrated with the first letter that he wrote to Elijah Muhammad because he felt like his grammar was a little garbage and off, and his penmanship was garbage as well. So he took it upon himself. That's when he decided to take the dictionary and copy the dictionary word for word to try to, increase his vocab and have a better grasp of words than he had. And then he also started reading a little bit more as well. at this point, he said he learned to read more selectively than aimlessly. And see, around this time, let me see. His brother also did him a favor. His brother in Detroit, Wilfred, he wrote to the parole board or whatnot and guaranteed them that if once Malcolm gets out of prison, if he gets let out of prison, that he'll have a job ready for him as well. Actually, he had like the Jewish guy that owned the store right. It was a furniture store, I believe. He had that guy write to, the parole board or whatnot, letting them know that it was guaranteed that Malcolm would have a job. And of course, a part of the communication is that his brother Wilfred would also provide a place for him to be paroled at or to stay at or whatnot when he gets out. So that eventually facilitated him being released. And Malcolm wrote to Elijah Muhammad again, keeping him up to date on the fact that they voted to have him released, but because the process was going to take like a few months or whatever. Because also, let me not forget to mention, Elijah Muhammad did write back to Malcolm as well while he was in prison after his first letter that he wrote him, which also, Malcolm, which is also something that Malcolm X took as a blessing as well, and it gave him a little bit more gas in the direction of Islam, even though he had basically pretty much already converted from that point, at least psychologically speaking. So eventually they let Malcolm out. He went to his sister's house. He went to his sister Ella's house first because she was still in Boston. And, they had a conversation. He had a conversation with Ella, and I believe one of his siblings was there as well. They had a conversation with her, and they couldn't get her to convert because at this point she was Christian. You know what I'm saying? And after he left Ella, that's when he finally made it to Detroit, to Wilford's house or whatnot. Everything was set up now. Wilford was a practicing Muslim, so Malcolm X basically just was hands-on, involved with the rituals and everything, and working. And then he eventually joined Temple 1 in Detroit. That was the same temple that his brother Wilford was a part of. The minister at the time of that temple was a guy named Lemuel Hassan. All right, it had a decent amount of numbers, but not like a whole bunch at the time. The temple had been, because let me see, this year I think it's 1952, if not 1953, at least 1952. That particular temple or mosque, really just a temple, it had been in existence for, let me see, 1952, that's what, 21 years, right? Yeah, about 21 years? Since 1931, it was first established by Elijah Muhammad. You know what I'm saying? When Master Farah Muhammad was teaching him about all the teachings that Malcolm X also conveyed himself. So anyway, so he enlisted in that temple, and he'll listen to the teachings or whatnot. Then Labor Day was coming up, and Malcolm was anxious about it because then he'll finally get the opportunity to go to Chicago and visit the man that he greatly admired, which was Elijah Muhammad. So that day came, and I think it was it was the Sunday before Labor Day, so I think August 31st. Something like that. Anyway, so they went out there, they drove out there or whatnot, and when they made it to Temple 2 in Chicago, it was about, he said about a total of about 200 people when you combine both temples or whatever. It was about 200 people or whatever, but, he went and he heard Elijah Muhammad speak, and out of nowhere, Elijah Muhammad highlighted Malcolm in the crowd. When he highlighted Malcolm, he pointed to him, he let everybody know that he was just getting out of prison or whatnot. and that he had wrote to him and they communicated in prison, and then he referenced like a story in the Bible of I think, was it? He referenced a story about, God keeping like a protective hedge on a person, and he was saying like Malcolm's protected. That guy had like a conversation with the devil, and the devil was like, if you take your hedge off him, I'll make him curse you to your face or whatnot. I think it was, I don't want to get the name wrong. I think it was Job. He said, "I make Job curse you to your face or whatnot." So he's basically making a comparison with Malcolm, saying that Malcolm's hedge could have been Islam while he was in prison, but now that he's out of prison and you have the freedom to do what you want to do, let's see, now that God takes his hedge off you, if you're going to fall back into that lifestyle or you're going to continue to develop and evolve yourself or whatever. We'll see what happens. And then he went on to say, I have faith that Malcolm was still on the right path or whatnot. After that, Elijah Muhammad invited them to have dinner at his house. When Malcolm went to his house, he was nervous, sitting at the table. This is a whole different, at this point, it's like a whole different experience with a connection to, or like a whole different experience devoid of any type of street trickery. You know what I'm saying? Like this particular meeting at Elijah Muhammad's house or home wouldn't be like a meeting between Malcolm, Sophia, and other people sitting there plotting how they gonna, you know what I'm saying, break in somebody's house or make a lick or whatnot. You know what I'm saying? Even like the whole mind frame of it, like when you go back to what Reginald said to Malcolm when he first wrote to him in Boston, and the mind frame that Malcolm had and what added to his ponderment. You know, like the contents of what he pondered. You know, like even that framework, even though it was something more positive and it was so vague that Malcolm couldn't really figure out the specifics, he was still thinking about it from a certain mind frame. So when you go back to Malcolm sitting at the table in Elijah Muhammad's house, and it being a whole different experience, and him waiting, trying to find his tongue to find something to say, again, it's a difference. And then this is somebody that Malcolm, has some reverence for. Eventually, he found the words that he wanted to say, so he asked me, he was like, Malcolm X asked Elijah, how many people you think should be a part of Temple 1, I believe he said. Not Temple 2, yeah, Temple 1. Elijah Muhammad said, thousands. And then Malcolm said, so how do we succeed in those type of numbers? He didn't put it verbatim like that, but essentially that's what he said. Then Elijah Muhammad said, you got to go after the children first, because when you go after the younger generation, then the older generation falls in line. Which is, I'm gonna go ahead and say this real quick. I might bring it up again. This is at the end of the book. It just reminds me of this too. It's like at the end. This is after he came back from Mecca, after the press conference. He referenced this story after talking about like another example with a hustler speaking a certain lingo that he understood that one of his own intellectual peers, if you will, as far as leadership, didn't know. But this is another story he went into. Again, toward the end of the book, he was like, it was a rally in Harlem, a street rally that he was invited to. And, he felt like the people that organized the rally or whatnot didn't really want him there. They just used his name or whatever for, used his name for publicity and to gather a large crowd, all this type of stuff. He said, when he got on the mic at this rally, remember this is much later, when he got on the mic at this rally, he said the people didn't want him there, they just wanted to use his name, blah, 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 and that was it. He got off the mic and walked off. And it caused mayhem. And he was saying like a lot of the teenagers was acting up. And because they was acting up and becoming chaotic, it caused the older folk to basically follow suit. But within this particular example, what he was trying to say, he was saying like it made him realize in that moment, as well as other people down the line who pointed this out, that not only did he have a strong connection to the younger people, but that he also had the power to stop a riot or start a riot. You know what I'm saying? But as far as me referencing that example ahead of time, it's the teenagers acting up because Malcolm not speaking, and then that causing the adults to act up. So what Elijah Muhammad said to Malcolm at the dinner table was true toward the end of their conversation and whatnot. So after that conversation, when Malcolm went back, he was inspired even more. So he started going out trying to, get people to convert, this and that. Eventually, he was encouraged to speak, to address the temple there. He was encouraged by the present minister at the time, Lemuel Hassan. When Malcolm spoke, he did a good job. He did a good job to the point where, he ended up getting other suggestions and invitations to speak again and also in other places. So within a 3-month span, the membership of Temple 1 increased to about 300 people. Then after that, that's when Malcolm he was granted permission to go to Boston from that point because of his success. So he went to Boston. There was another guy named Lloyd X, who would hold meetings in his home. So when Malcolm X first went out there, that's where he started at. He started speaking at these meetings at this home. Eventually, they started gaining more people to the point where, they had enough organizations to start another mosque or temple. And that's how they started Temple 11 there in Boston. More membership, more successes. Then that's when Malcolm was ordered or told by Elijah Muhammad to go to, or allowed to go to Philadelphia. When he went to Philadelphia, that's when, the same process there. Within 3 months, they established another temple, Temple 12. Then after that, because of those successes, there was another place called Springfield, Massachusetts, also, that Malcolm had temples established at as well. Also in Atlanta. They didn't really specify exactly where as far as in the book, and I didn't look it up in addition, but definitely somewhere in Atlanta. They didn't say the number of the temple, and they also didn't say the number of the temple as far as Springfield, Massachusetts is concerned. But because of all of these successes and whatnot, that's when Malcolm was granted to go to, or ordered to go to New York. Now he was, I'm finna grab another cigarette. Now when he was, ordered to go to New York by Elijah Muhammad, that was a particular direction that he was pleased. Let me grab one more of these, I'll get back to you. That was a particular direction that he was pleased to go to because, according to Malcolm, he said, at the time, even though you got 22 million black people in America, in New York City, in New York, in all 5 boroughs, at the time, it was about 1 million black people. So he felt like that was a really good location for him as well. This is in, what year is this? The early 1950s, I want to say. Yeah, it was still the early 1950s, so that became his main temple, by the way, up until he ended up, being disavowed. Before he ended up disavowing the nation officially. Let's put it that way. That was his main base from that point. They ended up, becoming even more and more successful at membership. The Nation of Islam actually not just in New York, but all across the country. They had more people listening to them, etc. Malcolm X felt like, you know, it was a good time for him to acquire a wife. So this lady named Betty, who was in nursing school at the time, but she was also a part of the Nation of Islam. He had already been familiar with her because, you know, they have conversations, and then he'll try to, you know, he'll teach classes, try to like educate some of the women in the classes that she'll teach, because she was a part of the the women version of the Fruit of Islam. I feel so remiss that I can't remember the exact name of it. I swear. It'll come to me later. So Malcolm used to teach classes there to help her out. He kind of thought about whether or not, you know, how he was going to approach it as far as marrying her. She came off as the right height. You know, she was intelligent or whatever. And this is also during the time where, you know, she was having, as far as Betty, she was having personal issues because her parents didn't approve of, you know, her being a part of the Nation of Islam. So they, you know, kind of threatened to, you know, block her funds or not pay for her school. And Malcolm knew, you know, he considered the fact that, you know, if she was his wife, that he'll be able to also help out in that aim too, because the Nation of Islam paid for all of his necessary, you know, costs or whatnot. You know, like places he got to live at, whether he needed the car, you know, his travel expenses, all that type of stuff was taken care of. Her being his wife, you know, she'll kind of benefit from there as well. That's like one of the practical aspects of it. But I feel like this, before I go on, because they ended up getting married in 1958 in Michigan, in Lansing, Michigan, where Malcolm X was from. They first went to Indiana because they thought it was, you know, it was some miscommunication. Somebody gave them the wrong information, like they could go down there and get married in a day or whatnot. But that wasn't the case, and they ended up driving all the way back to Michigan, and actually Detroit, Michigan, then Langston, and then that's when he got married to her there. But before I go on with that, and they had 4 daughters and all that, but before I go on with that, I feel like just based on, you know, the book, and again, that which I know outside the book also, and what I have seen with Betty, and from, as far as like from the book itself, you know, Malcolm's own words, you know, because like, think what, chapter 13, that's when he started talking about love and lust. But as far as, and it gave me a big hint about how he felt about Betty, as far as that which is more so implied. You know what I'm saying? Like, in the book, he did say that he loved Betty. He did eventually love Betty. That's what he said. He was like, I eventually loved her or whatnot. Malcolm X, this is the God honest truth. When he first got with Betty, it wasn't lust.